the parables of Jesus. That we've actually been doing a sermon series on the parables of Jesus over the past couple months now, and when you think about the parables of Jesus, it makes you think about how it shows Jesus often responded with something that wasn't necessarily directly an answer, but it makes you think about how Jesus understood the value of thinking and the value of critical thought and the value of actually, coming up with, the power of people using their own intelligence and own knowledge and own wisdom to come up with a solution. But at the same time, each parable that was shared ultimately has one point, and ultimately that point is to point to God, right? The goodness of God. But when you think about it's interesting because it's almost as if I know there's this thing that people say nowadays, if you know, right? Or if you IYKYK, right? You see a lot of people post that on social media nowadays. If you know. That's sort of like how Jesus treated his parables in a way, right? He wouldn't give a direct answer, but for those who sought after wisdom, it was understood by them, and if not, they continued to seek after Jesus and continue to follow him, and through his actions could see the answer to the question that may have been presented or an issue that may have been presented that precipitated Jesus bringing up the parable, right? And so I think that's something that we all could take away from Jesus. Sometimes when someone has a question, although you can just get it over with and give them the answer, sometimes it's a little bit better to present to them a parable or a story, or even respond to them with a question. Jesus responded with questions as well. And, just to sometimes allowing people to think and find their way, have their journey to the answer to a question would be a lot more beneficial versus just giving them the answer. Kind of like how people say, teach a man how to fish instead of fishing for him, right? But back to the parables, something that we've established at the beginning of this series about the parables, which was really interesting, and I think something that I feel can help everybody really take a deeper dive into the parables and understand what is supposed to happen from them. Something that our lead pastor here kind of had us key in on and make sort of like a theme for every message is that the parables of Jesus presents a picture, right? Jesus presents us a picture in the form of a parable or in the form of a story, and that picture then becomes a mirror because it's supposed to make us look at some things that need to be addressed in our lives. And the interesting thing about it is some of these parables that Jesus shared, it would leave the Pharisees and some of the other religious leaders back then feeling like they're the good guy or they're the hero in the parable, but in reality, they were looking at it all wrong. It's supposed to expose what's within you to bring about change within you, right? And so Jesus presents a picture that then becomes a mirror, right? And it's Jesus' parables, when you take a deep dive into them, it's really something that you can constantly go back on every single time. You know, like your favorite movie or your favorite book or your favorite song, it's something that you can constantly keep on going back to over and over. And I think that's what the parables are meant for. Obviously, all of Scripture is profitable and meant for teaching and to grow in wisdom. But I think the parables especially are good to go back to help us kind of do a self-check or an internal check within us to see what we may need to be addressed in our lives and what we could do. Like with the Good Samaritan, for example, are we caring after our neighbor? Are we showing the love of the Lord to others? Or are we just passing by people and just saying, oh, their problems aren't my problems? And in some cases, some cases, obviously you can't help everybody. But at the same time, I think that as God's people, we're called to support one another and, go to our neighbor and help them out. And the shocking and powerful thing about that parable was that it was a Samaritan who were looked down upon, who were looked at, kind of as less than, or why would a Jew be interacting with a Samaritan or someone from Samaria? But the fact that Jesus shared that parable should have exposed the idea of self-gratification or self-righteousness within anybody who is experiencing it, and just letting them know that, these are my neighbors. We're all neighbors, and we're all meant to help one another in the ways that we can, in an obedient way. But yeah, so Jesus presents these parables. He presents it, it's like a picture, and then that picture becomes a mirror and allows us to see ourselves within it, and not in a way where it's narcissism, which is reading ourselves into the scriptures as the hero, but seeing what we need to address in our lives, what we need to lift up to the Lord and ask him to change within us. Do you have pride, or do you have lust, or do you have any of these other things? Are you looking at life a certain way that you shouldn't be looking at? Are you greedy? All of these things. I think Jesus' parables are meant to show us about ourselves so that we can do the last part, which is that mirror becoming a window to look through, right? And all credit goes to the lead pastor here at the church for that. And I forget where it actually came from, where he got it from. But yeah, Jesus' parables, they present us a picture. That picture becomes a mirror, and then that mirror becomes a window that we can look through and see a way of moving forward. How do we respond to this parable? Do we respond with pride, thinking that we're the hero of the story, thinking that we deserve the gratification, thinking that we deserve, all of the good things? Or do we leave it asking ourselves, what can I do to be more like the person that was, held in high regard in this parable, right? Or even, how can I become more humble in this way? How can I, have these things addressed in my life that can bring me closer to God, instead of living in a way that is continuing to further separate me from God, right? So that window is meant to show us God's grace and mercy, and how his grace, his mercy, and his goodness can draw us back to him, and can, surgically remove any disease. And when I say disease, I'm referring to the things like the lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, the pride of life, all of these things, the works of the flesh that are within us, to mold us and shape us and create. And, he's the potter's hand, right? And, how he can just shape us to be more like Jesus, to have his compassion, to have his love, to have, his characteristics and the way that he lived his life. And obviously we're not going to be perfect, but it's all a process of growing closer and closer to him and being more and more like him. So a way that y'all can read these parables, a way that I've learned as we've gone throughout this sermon series the past couple months, is to read them as Jesus presenting the audience back then and us now, a picture, and allowing that picture to become a mirror and see what needs to be addressed in your life, and what you need to lift up to God and allow God to remove from your life, and then allow it to become a mirror that you can look through and see the correct response, or a way of moving forward in response to what was just shared. So that's the way I was looking at it, and I hope that is encouraging. I hope that kind of brings a different perspective, or maybe you've already been reading the parables in this way. So yeah, that was something that I thought was interesting. And I think that it can really bring about some level of change within anybody's life to read the parables in this way.